Talk to you.
You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
This weekend, a new poll from DHM Research asked 500 Oregonians 3 questions about marijuana legalization. This poll, plus a 46.5% vote for Measure 80 and a 55% vote for Initiative 502 in nearby Washington, has persuaded the editorial board of the state's largest newspaper, The Oregonian, to call on the Oregon legislature to put a reasonable marijuana legalization proposal on the table for voters in 2014. According to the poll, half of Oregonians now support taxing and regulating marijuana like alcohol. Only a third strongly oppose legalization of marijuana. In the Portland and Eugene metro areas, the support is at 55%. A full 80% of Oregonians believe legalization is inevitable in the state, and 70% of Oregonians want to vote on the proposal, whether it's presented as an initiative or by advocates as a referral from the legislature. The only question now is whether the Washington, D.C.-based marijuana policy project will mess that up. Now, for those of you not familiar with the situation, here it is in a nutshell. There is a coalition of every marijuana group in Oregon that's working together with the legislature to craft a legalization referral. These locals are going by the name New Approach Oregon. I don't know, not original, but whatever. New Approach Oregon, and are headed by Anthony Johnson. Now, Anthony Johnson is also the director of the National Cannabis Coalition, and he's a longtime marijuana activist. And full disclosure, he's a friend of mine, and I used to work for National Cannabis Coalition, just so everybody knows where we're coming from. Now, Anthony's last political position was the director for the campaign of the 2010 ill-fated Measure 74. That was when we tried to pass medical marijuana dispensaries. Now, New Approach Oregon is also joined by Paul Stanford, who's the head of the National Medical Marijuana Clinic chain THCF. He's also the host of Cannabis Common Sense on this network and the chief petitioner of last year's Measure 80 legalization attempt that also failed. The coalition also includes Madeline Martinez, who's the proprietor of the world-famous Cannabis Cafe and a member of the NORML board of directors. The coalition has garnered the support of every local group in the state that's working on medical and recreational marijuana issues, and it's backed behind the scenes by some of the biggest political movers and shakers in Portland and Salem. The group is also well funded. They've been lobbying in Salem, working with lawmakers, law enforcement, the Liquor Control Board, and the beer and wine industry to create a sensible legislative referral each group can support and the voters will pass. Now, legislative referral, by the way, that's when the legislature writes an initiative and then lets the state voters vote on it. Some states have this, some states don't. Oregon does. Meanwhile, there's the Marijuana Policy Project out of Washington, D.C. It hired Roy Kaufman, the former campaign spokesperson for the Measure 80 campaign, as its Oregon representative. MPP is not supportive of the move by locals to place marijuana on the ballot in 2014. Preferring instead to run an educational campaign through 2015, culminating in an initiative on the ballot in 2016. MPP claims the support and turnout in a presidential election year will make legalization a slam dunk in 2016. The problem is that MPP is not at all supportive of the 2014 ballot run by locals. In a memo sent to members of the local coalition, and this was before MPP hired Kaufman, MPP Executive Director Rob Campia wrote, quote, "Given that an initiative in November 2014 would be almost certain to lose, MPP would contribute no money toward a signature drive, paid staff, or advertising during the 2013-2014 cycle. If, however, a tax and regulate initiative is placed on the November 2014 ballot, then Oregon will fall by the wayside and lose its time in the sun in 2016 in the same way that California was premature in 2010 and was unable to raise any funding for a 2012 ballot measure. The comparison between California's past failure and Oregon's prospective failure is pretty precise. Except, of course, California in 2010 existed in a United States that had only 44% nationwide support for legalization. California could point to no legal marijuana states. California didn't have 80% of its population living within an hour's drive of a state that passed legalization with a 55% vote. California hadn't just given a 46.5% vote to a wide-open legalize all the weed you want initiative just 2 years ago. California didn't have a repeal of the anti-gay marriage amendment on its ballot. California doesn't vote by mail. California didn't have the editorial board of the state's largest newspaper telling the legislature to put legalization on the ballot. California didn't have every marijuana activism group in the state united behind its legalization efforts. California got the bulk of its money from one man, while Oregon has raised plenty of money from many sources now, in a state 1/10 as large and 1/20th as expensive for ad buys. California's 2 senators opposed legalization. In fact, Senator Feinstein chaired the anti-Prop 19 committee, while Oregon's 2 senators would likely support legalization. California's initiative was not a referral from the legislature, bypassing the need for an expensive signature drive. And California's governor signed a decrim bill that took the wind out of Prop 19 sales, while Oregon has had ticket-only decrim for 40 years. So, other than those dozen differences, the comparison's pretty precise, I suppose. Now, this not-so-subtle threat by MPP to the locals to stand down and let MPP secure another legalization victory its way in 2016 did not sit well with local activists. Undeterred, they went forward with negotiations with the legislature and urged MPP to join them in the effort. MPP refused. And despite the memo's threat that MPP wouldn't spend any money on paid staff or advertising during 2013 if locals moved forward, MPP did spend some money by hiring Roy Kaufman and by beginning its Safer-style ad campaign. Safer, or Safer Alternatives for Enjoyable Recreation, is the brainchild of Mason Tvert, who is now MPP's Director of Communications. Mason, a student at a Colorado university, formed the group to highlight the dangers that college kids faced from binge drinking. There had been a few high-profile deaths on Colorado college campuses, and Mason wondered why students were punished for marijuana, thus incentivizing them to choose the more dangerous drug, alcohol. Safer became an 8-year campaign in Colorado, showing up at public events in a state where the Coors Brewery is located and the governor is a microbrew millionaire. So MPP's first salvo in the Safer campaign for Oregon was a billboard in downtown Portland. It was a picture of a glass of beer, a glass of wine, and a pot leaf with labels reading "Beer, Wine, Safer," and encouraged people to not just drink, but think. The billboard was purchased to coincide with the Spring Beer and Wine Festival, a longtime Portland favorite, given our love for craft beer and local wineries. But back in Salem, however, the lobbyists from New Approach, Oregon were furious. The politically well-connected lobbyists for the local beer and wine industries were not exactly happy about all 4 news stations devoting coverage to a billboard implying that their products are dangerous. And the local marijuana lobbyists were still rallying support in Salem for a bill in committee to tax and regulate marijuana. The beer and wine lobbyists were ready to issue a public statement against the bill, which would have cost the votes of some legislators who rely on the campaign donations from microbrews and wineries. Only a phone call from New Approach, Oregon to the beer and wine lobby explaining they had nothing to do with MPP's efforts kept that from happening and allowed the bill to escape the committee with a 6-3 vote. It also turns out that MPP purchased the billboard directly across the street from a church and a drug rehab center, which complained to the media about the placement of the billboard. Now, never mind that the previous billboard had been a Coors Light ad. The local coalition leaders cringed that the public and Kaufman dismissed their concerns, and it left the public to believe that marijuana reformers in Oregon are insensitive to religion and drug rehab. MPP lacks a local insight in Oregon politics that the reformers at New Approach Oregon have in spades. Knowing these lawmakers on a first-name basis is what got Oregon its nation's largest 24 ounces and 24 plant medical marijuana limits. Colorado tactics may backfire here. In Colorado, the mega brew industry is marijuana's enemy, and playing a safer campaign works there. In Oregon, the microbrew and winery industry can be our allies because our alcohol industry is more about tourism than unit sales. In fact, the head of the Spring Beer and Wine Festival wants it to be the Spring Beer, Wine, and Weed Festival once we legalize. In Colorado, the medical marijuana industry is thought of by the public as a strong government control of marijuana, but Oregon's medical industry is still seen as out of control and Wild West, with winks and nods about donations and reimbursements shadily maintaining a quasi-legality. If Oregon reformers are going to play legal marijuana against anything, it would be against medical marijuana that so many think here is a ruse for legalization anyway. Our Measure 74 and Measure 80 both lost in part because the public saw them as attempts by the currently quasi-legal medical industries to monopolize marijuana. I don't understand why MPP won't work with the New Approach Oregon group. It's a solid professional team with funding and a smart plan for a legislative referral that would cost nothing for a signature drive. What harm would there be in coordination between the two groups? Fund an educational campaign that doesn't demonize craft beer and wine, and work for that legislative referral in 2014. If it wins, great. Keep working and have legal marijuana. If it doesn't win, then keep going toward 2016. What's the problem? Unless you're worried that funding in 2013 might educate people to pass somebody else's legalization. That wouldn't be it, would it, Rob?
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
All right, that's all the time we got here for Hour 1. We're headed to Toker Talk Radio. Hour 2, we'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. For Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.